I'm in music, I do, a lot of things that can be understood by people who are not musicians. Students always ask, do I need to know music theory to take your class? No, you don't. So we have the same thing. I've called this West Philly, and I've put West Philly music in quotation marks so that if you want to Google our website, that's what you do. You Google West Philly music, just all one word, and the site will pop up. I'm going to show you some screenshots of the site, but I don't trust using the internet in public presentations, so you'll have to. Though I do a lot of online stuff, I know what can go wrong. So I'm going to do a PowerPoint presentation. It's not a beautiful one. It is more somewhere between a kind of red text, and these are the things to remind me what I'm hoping to tell you today. But we'll go through it fairly quickly, and I would like this to really be a time of engagement where you ask some questions. I'm going to present one side of things. There are definitely downsides or challenges to doing this kind of work, and perhaps we should talk very realistically about that. So if you want to argue with me, you're welcome to do that. I like engagement. Okay, so just so that you have some sense of where I come from and how I come to this work. So I am an ethnomusicologist, which is like an anthropologist of music, for those of you who don't know. So it means that I do community work. That is how I generate my data, right? So I'm used to doing that kind of thing. And of course, we work with individuals too. So the jazz book I just wrote actually was, although it's South African women thinking in jazz, is really thinking about what we can say about South African jazz coming out of the life story of one individual, Satima B. Benjamin. So I combine the sort of trends of historical musicology with ethnomusicology. And I have to say, though I am an ethnomusicologist, I love the archive. I love it. I love the archive. I love to dig in the past. So it's not even that I'm anti the past, not at all. But just so that you've got some sense of the kind of, I just had an extraordinary exposure to manuscript studies in the archive at NYU as a grad student. And it really kind of nurtured my love for thinking about the past and what the past can, and what we can learn about it. And as a South African, which is my second point, who grew up under apartheid, where the past was so reconstructed and so suppressed in so many ways, the capacity to open up the archive and to dig into it is in fact something that I find very exciting. It's what makes me want to be a scholar. So I'm certainly not, my training is in musicology. I'm not anti the past, as often ethnomusicologists are accused of being. Not at all. I am an ethnomusicologist because I want to engage with all of the world's peoples and engage with difference and see how we can kind of constitute a level playing field for all. So I grew up under apartheid, and where I come to, when you see the work I do, you'll come to some understanding of where I am. My father is a Presbyterian minister, and he very much at some point had very much a sense of calling towards a ministry of reconciliation. And so I grew up with this thing, who is my neighbor? You call to love God and love your neighbor. Who is my neighbor, and how do you love your neighbor? Whoever that is, right? So I remember the story of the Good Samaritan, and it was always paralleled with real life experiences in South Africa. So the issue of the person lying on the side of the road sometimes was a black South African when the ambulance went past, right? Because the ambulance wouldn't pick up a black South African. So do you see that there was a very kind of real correspondence between the stories that I heard as a child and the story and the life that I saw around me? So that's one of the sort of motives. It's not what I teach my students. I'm just telling you where I come from. But I do my work, unlike a lot of the work at the University of Pennsylvania in civic engagement, which is located around schools. My work is in faith-based organizations, although I have also worked with one independent school as well. And of course, where I come to this is actually, I came to Penn 15 years ago. Then it was just the Center for Community Partnerships. But what enables me to do this kind of work in the way that I do, and in a way to sustain it when I'm doing a lot of other things, is the Netta Center for Community Partnerships. And it's not just that there's a kind of central base there, but there's also a discourse for doing this kind of work. So it moves from the field work of anthropology and ethnomusicology, which is really about a scholar going out there to go and do work as an individual, to collect that data and build their own career, towards being a much more, hopefully, equitable and shared kind of research process. But what I loved about coming to Penn, and I didn't know this coming to Penn, but I got a call one day from the director, Ara Harkavy. If any of you know him, you know what that means. He's very high energy, perhaps a little on bordering, a little bit, he will push you into what he wants, but always in a good way. So he has developed a language for what they call ABCS service learning, which is academically based community service, which is them wanting to integrate it into an academic course, essentially, and really pushing faculty not just to teach the stuff, but to develop some kind of research project around the work. So that's basically where we are. But it gives us a language for talking about this kind of work. And it's not just about missionizing the community. I can't stand that stuff. It is about really a partnership with people. Sometimes it's Penn initiated, and that can be problematic, but we look for the mutually beneficial processes. So what I'm going to do very quickly today is define academically based community service pedagogy. And I do want to say that we start off with this as a form of pedagogy. It is not a form of research initially. And I think I've been listening to some of the Humanities in Action, right, the great courses, and at the moment I've just started listening to the World History, many CDs that come out of NYU. And one of the things he says there is this shift towards world history really was a pedagogical shift initially, not a research shift amongst scholars and intellectuals. And I would say that with ABCS, that's probably the same process. With the introduction to world music and culture, those things that ethnomusicologists teach now, I think it's a similar sort of thing. It starts off as some sort of obligation to increase what is represented, but we haven't thought through it necessarily in its larger way. We have now started to do that in ethnomusicology too. Okay, I'm going to show you images. They're just screenshots of the website that we have created for the classes that we teach. We'll discuss briefly the benefits for students and the community. We'll probe the potential for innovative, democratic, equitable mode of research and learning, and then suggest possibilities for civic engagement in humanities teaching and research in the 21st century. So what is ABCS pedagogy? Basically, it is service learning as part of an academic course. So it is not just going and doing good in the community. I don't think people really just want us in there doing good. They really want some sort of meaningful, sustained, long-term engagement. So ABCS, according to Ara Harkavy and the people he publishes with, ABCS is an active, creative pedagogy that integrates community service with academic study to enhance a student's capacity to think critically, solve problems practically, and function as lifelong moral democratic citizens in a democratic society. I have to say, I'm not one of the moral being people. I'm not saying it's immoral to do it. It's just moral somehow doesn't push me. I suppose it is somehow the faith-based thing that is something else for me. I'm not pushing the moral thing, but I do like the critical thinking, the problem-solving, the relationship-building part of the process. Benson and Harkavy continue. Service learning is, again, this notion of democracy, which is very much in the literature that I read on humanities in preparing this presentation for you today. Democratic, collaborative, and experimental. So there is an element of risk. For Penn undergraduates who really, frankly, like to have things, they are, very high-powered students doing too many courses. They want everything highly organized, highly predictable, in a way almost commoditized. This is most of the students. These can be very stressful courses because there is an element that simply, I've had course reviews that say I'm disorganized. It's not that I'm disorganized, it's I can't control the process all the way through, which doesn't mean to say that it's my problem. It means that I can't, if somebody doesn't pitch for your interview, it's not my problem. It's not my fault. It's not that I'm disorganized, it's that we're dealing with human beings. So I like for Penn students that they are having to deal with real life, that this is not all just knowledge, information as it's just packaged for them, but there's an element of unpredictability unpredictability, experimentalism in the process. So it's an experimental approach to learning, personal and civic development, knowledge production, and change. So very much as I've read the humanities stuff for the United States, coming out of the kind of 1960s model, the move in the humanities towards pushing on the one, that certain move towards pushing for humanities as an agent of social change. Very much Ira Harkavy, who leads this movement at Penn, is in that kind of mode. Of course, I'm sympathetic to it because I grew up under apartheid and had similar sorts of pushes that knowledge must have relevance, it must be socially just, and those kinds of things. That's not necessarily what everybody believes, and you don't have to be that way either. I'm just saying that this is where it comes from, this kind of epistemology comes from. So ABCS accomplishes its goals by engaging students in action-oriented, reflective, and I guess that's the humanities part too, right? It's always about reflecting on the process, reflecting on what could have been better. If you were to go back again, what other questions would you ask? What was gained, what was lost in the process? There's a lot of kind of personal reflection that happens all the way through, because you're also engaging with a community who sometimes get mad. I'll get emails from a community member who said, I've had enough of Penn students doing blah, 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 and then we have to sit down and quickly figure out how we are going to proceed forward. Usually we're able to do it. So it's reflective, real-world problem solving. Now, a class in music, you're going to wonder how it's real-world problem solving, and it isn't the problem of solving lead in classrooms, lead in paint, right, and in classrooms. That's not the kind of problem solving we're doing. I would say very much in the humanities, it's much more the problem is a lack of representation. There's a lack of scholarship on these genres. There's a lack of engagement with these. So it's more about it's a slightly different problem solving matter than it would be, for example, in doing STEM or math or something like that in these communities. But the whole thing, I guess, in Ira Harkavy's sort of language is to produce, towards greater democracy in society. Okay. So this is a lot of definitional stuff. Let me just talk through what some of the goals are. So I've been doing this work since 2001, the fall of 2001, when I had to teach field methods in ethnomusicology. Ira Harkavy made a call at the right time and offered me a course development grant, and he said, and you must do if you want to teach research in West Philadelphia, please do something on gospel music, about which I knew nothing. Okay, I'm being honest, I take the risks, and I've learned an enormous amount. It hasn't gone into really publication for me, but I feel like I've had to read a lot in order to teach it, and I've worked a lot with students who've gone into this kind of work and done dissertations and stuff. So there's been a lot of outgrowth from it. So it's undergraduates and graduate students doing research. I have my freshman seminars. Their students come first semester are undertaking small little team research projects. I've had the dean of the college, who I'm very fond of and who does STEM work for ABCS, say that we don't take people into the community, freshmen into the community in their first semester. I do. But I'm very careful about how I do it. I also, I oversee the process very carefully, and we go into faith-based organizations where they're caring communities of people, et cetera, et cetera. So we do it very carefully. And one of my motivations, ethnomusicology, anthropology, the academy is often accused of kind of just parachuting in, taking information and never leaving anything for the community itself. So I wanted to make sure that whatever research we generated was going to be publicly accessible. It's easier said than done. We can talk about this. It's getting easier now. So I went through 3 iterations of my website before I actually had a design that worked, and all the films have to be HTML coded. It's not straightforward, so we can talk about that at the end. I'm moving now much more towards blogging and attaching the blogs to the website, because blogs can be done by students themselves and done by the end of the semester, and everything is there. But so the issue of publicly accessible is very, very important to me. The other thing about the Penn Library, although it's a private university, Ben Franklin had this thing that the public must have access to the resources of the library. So if you're a member of the public and you have a government-issued ID, you can come into the library 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. So you can access resources. You can come in and see the stuff, which is a very nice part of the institution. The issue of diversity for me is very near and dear to my heart. I'm from Africa. We are bringing in a few more African diaspora students from the Caribbean, African American students from Africa. I feel like these classes that we teach are very important, for the African Americans who are coming in and maybe have grown up in the church. The church is never represented in the secular university very much, but this gives some students who've grown up in the gospel tradition, for example, some way to be leaders in the class. Sometimes it creates friction, doesn't always work. I had one student, she's actually graduating this year, she was a freshman in my seminar, we did a gospel project. And her parents said, why are you taking a gospel class? You grew up in Philadelphia and you grew up in the black church. Why are we paying for a Penn class on these things? Which I think is a very fair question, but by the end she was very clear she'd learned an enormous amount. And she's taken really interesting leadership at Penn in a way that I do think had something to do with her kind of finding her feet in the first semester through this kind of class. So diversifying the curriculum. So what I'm talking about here, we've got growing student diversity. You want to give minority students a place in knowledge production. That's the one side. But it's also about institutional transformation. I heard our brand new dean the other day of School of Arts and Sciences saying, we are interested in diversifying the faculty, but with the tenure system, it's much harder to diversify very quickly in the way that you would want, say, in the span of 5 or 10 years to diversify the faculty when you've got tenure. People have got tenure until they die or whatever. All right, so it's much harder to. So in my view, what these kinds of classes can do is it's students who are saying, we want to do this kind of stuff. They go to a faculty member and say, will you help us with this class? So you're being able to bring in difference to the curriculum without actually necessarily going out and hiring other people. So it's a lot of these classes are student driven. We want to do a project around this. Would they approach a faculty member and say, would you be willing to teach such a class for us? So obviously building partnerships is a human relationships across the things we would expect, differences of race, class, language, belief. And the emphasis always is on some kind of joint project. Doesn't start off like that. It takes a long time to build the kind of equity into the process. And then these are two things that I've now just starting to happen. So I told you I've been involved in this for now 13 years at Penn. We've just started a faculty seminar actually funded by a parent of one of the kids who's in some of my seminars. I've taken her to South Africa on another class that I teach. So they have funded these civic engagement seminars, which basically brings, I was just saying, it's a very interesting process. We just had our first meeting a couple of weeks ago. It took me 2 years to get it together and some administrative help to get people really wanting to come. And what we started off first, and this has been an important lesson, I think, based on what we've been talking about up until now. I started off by just inviting arts and culture faculty who sort of do civic engagement or who might be interested in it. And I didn't get a lot of response, so I kind of let it go and then said I need help. So I went to NETA. They gave me a list of 100 people in the university at some point may be interested. Somebody from the vet school, the engineering school, I'm like, this is a ridiculous list. And I said so, and I was wrong. Because at our first meeting, and people had to reply, our first meeting we had about 20 people. We had somebody from the vet school, from engineering, from Wharton Business School. We had somebody from the medical school, from Graduate School of Education. We had very few arts and culture faculty, actually. We had the vice provost for research came in. Because we also are diversifying who our faculty are and who our administrators and leaders are. This is an African American woman whose son has done hip hop stuff in one of the local arts organizations. She wants to know what's going on. It was an extraordinary gathering of people. So yeah, that was my short-sightedness. It wasn't working by being small. It works when we open ourselves up. We had the most extraordinary conversation. We had somebody present, he's African American. He was working in West Philadelphia, which is largely an African American community, so he knows how to speak to people. He worked with the older community around a community organization in West Philly. It was just a very, very powerful story about how he's got Penn students, freshmen, also a freshman seminar, involved in West Philadelphia, really transforming the way they think about things. We have a goal now of getting, initially it'll just be 1 year of funding in graduate fellowships in civic engagement, so it would be an extra year of funding, maybe a 6th year of funding, to give those people who do something in the School of Arts and Sciences, it's not just in arts and culture, who do this kind of work to give them an extra year to finish a dissertation, but in the end, to get some kind of certification or something that says that they've done focused work on civic engagement. We think it'll make them more marketable. Okay, so these are some of the classes that I've done, the ABCs in ethnomusicology in my field. So it started off with field methods in ethnomusicology for upper level undergrads and graduate students, where we look at music in or as culture. We look at issues of difference. We've done a gospel music project, popular music and Islam, and then a small jazz project. There are lots of other jazz projects going on. Mine was just focused on one assisted living center I got access to from somebody who heard I was doing this work. I had 50 students. It was madness. 50 students doing one project. I divided them to 10 groups of 5, and they did joint projects. World Music and Cultures, of course, this is mostly an undergraduate team project. I do a lot of small team projects on jazz. Also so that you know that these classes fulfill certain of the general requirements, which is why students will take them initially, and that's sort of the way you get them in and then open up this world to them. There's no service learning requirement for undergraduates or graduates at Penn. They don't think it's the right way to go. Certainly that's the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences. And then freshman seminars is really where I'm working to go. I like the small groups of people who are fresh to Penn, fresh to Philadelphia, often from all parts of the world. These amazing ways of getting them into the culture of the university, but getting them out too, because a lot of students will say there's this boundary of 38th Street that you don't go beyond because it's not safe beyond 38th Street in Philadelphia. Well, we take them to 47th and 56th. We do it carefully and cautiously, but we take care of the safety. Okay, so here's my website. So this is Community Through Music. On the right-hand side, you can see those are all links. So the jazz one are web pages for musicians that our students interviewed. Then you've got gospel, the Gospel College. Islam is a little bit further down. There is more to still go up on the site. That's the one downside of what I've done so far. Really very big downside is I'm not able to sustain getting the material up. But this gives you a very nice sense of what the site is all about. So on the right-hand side, every line there is a link to more material. That's the field methods in ethnomusicology. You get a syllabus, the rationale for the class, etc., etc. Another one, this is for music majors and minors. The Introduction to World Music and Cultures for all students. Okay, so let me talk very quickly too about the site of Philadelphia and as a kind of destination for African American music research. Pretty much what I'm going to tell you really quickly. I've taught these classes in a lot of different ways, as a critical writing seminar, in all kinds of ways, right? Wherever I could get money, pretty much, to do it is where I've gone. So Philadelphia is really important, but when I came to Philadelphia, I knew none of this. As a destination for freed slaves from the South, W.E.B. Du Bois lived and wrote in that city. Richard Allen established the first African-American independent church in the U.S. in Philadelphia. It's the African Methodist Episcopal Church, and its archive is on 38th Street. I mean, it's a really extraordinary resource. Marian Anderson, the African-American opera singer, she nurtured her vocal skills in the churches. Paul Robeson spent a period of his life there. The Clare Award gospel singers still live there. And then the Cuba Institute, which is the Muslim community I've worked with quite a lot. It's actually, I have to say, in my heart, my most favorite project. It's the second oldest Islamic community or masjid after the Albanians in the city. And the person who, I won't talk too much about this project, but the person who founded this community was himself African-American jazz musician. And he heard the sound of Quranic recitation and he said, that is so beautiful. He converted to Islam. He spent 12 years studying the Quran and recitation and memorizing the Quran and Arabic language in Saudi Arabia. He hauled his family of African-American children over to Saudi Arabia for 12 years. And so we work with this community. They're just an extraordinary community. What I love about it is that the view of West Philly is that it's a place of poverty, that it's Penn students who have education and all the rest is chaos and poor and underserved. Well, you go into the Cuba Institute on 47th Street and Lancaster Avenue. It doesn't look like a lot from the outside, but you go in and there are people who can recite the Quran. They are 15 years old. They've memorized the Quran. They can write in Arabic and they can write in English. All right, so there's an independent school. It's a lovely way to help us, and there are people of absolute peace. You know, the idea of Islamic extremism is not there. There's a very strong sense of indigenizing Islam in the African American, that you make Islam work for you, which is why we can talk about popular culture. Our view of Islam is that it doesn't engage with popular culture, it doesn't engage with music, but they've got huge hip-hop communities. There's a woman hip-hop artist called Misunderstood, all right? With her, she wears everything covered, and she's got CDs, and she's really awesome. Okay, so there's lots of really interesting stuff to learn about how you indigenize Islam in Philadelphia. But we've had students those students come into our classes. These are high school students to talk about, as African Americans, why do you want to almost marginalize yourself more by not just being a minority African American and black, but also then being Muslim? I mean, we'll talk about stereotypes of difference. And the kids talk about it. It's really powerful. They teach our students stuff, and it's been a very good experience. So we have the Gospel Project, the Islamic one, oral history, and then we've extended into an artist in residence program in the schools. We did that a little bit to fit into Netta's model, but I don't do that model so well. And then we've also done this collaborative project. When I started the Gospel Project, my idea was I went to the Annenberg Center, which is a performing arts presenting venue at Penn, and I went to the director and I said to him, I want to bring Aretha Franklin to campus as part of this project, and he said that will cost $70,000. It's not on. But what it did spur then is they went to the Philadelphia Music Project. It's now something else, but it is a foundation that gives out money to Philadelphia for music projects. They got $100,000 and launched a new series at the Annenberg Center on American roots music and gospel. They didn't have it before, and it reaches out to the audiences in West Philadelphia, which was a new target audience for them. So very nice form of transformation. We now have lots of events where we bring in school teachers from West Philly, community members. They do soul food evenings. It's really transformed things. And we have given Aretha Franklin an honorary degree at Penn. So I didn't meet her in the end. I don't know what it cost Penn, but it didn't cost the Annenberg Center. So this is one of the churches, Monumental Baptist. That 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is the documentary film, actually made by graduate students. We've done work with this. There's a storefront church or a Baptist church on every corner in West Philly. So often they've taken over for a synagogue or a Muslim place, or a former white Christian church has been taken over and become a kind of black community organization and church. Second Antioch is another group that we've done a film with. And here is our Cuba Institute stuff. So this was graduate students making documentary films, interviewing people in the kind of ethnographic way. Doing a lot of oral history stuff, and these are absolutely beautiful. I mean, they are graduate students, they're not filmmakers. They are documentaries in that sense, but some really, really beautiful narratives put together. There's a lot of work on women in these masjids that was put together by one of my other grad students. And then Bayard Lankes is a free jazz musician from Philadelphia, and this is one of the websites that was made for him by an undergrad. Part of what we do to reinforce our kind of community partnership at the end of a semester is students get their stuff together, and then we have a community event. And it's at that event, the make or break, can we put this video up on our website or not? So the publicly accessible is a problem if it contravenes how the community wants to represent itself. So in scholarly terms, a little tricky to navigate. We have had a couple of videos, one that was absolutely not allowed to be put up, and the student has had to work very hard to go back to that community, and she's done a great job to sort of reconcile after not doing what the community wanted. And then we had another one with another grad student who has, how can I say, well, she has a complex relationship to Christianity and Islam. She's African American. She finished ages ago. But she did this project with the girls in the high school, the Islamic high school, and she let them use the video camera and kind of fool around like they did at home. They didn't see there was anything wrong, and one of the educators walked into the room while they were messing around, videoing each other, laughing and joking. And I got a very, very severe email after that saying she's totally crossed the line, she can't do that, we can't have our girls represented. This is conservative Islam, right? You can't have our young girls represented publicly as they're messing around with video cameras, they are women of Allah, and et cetera, et cetera. So so it was very painful. I want to tell you, for this woman, young woman, very, very painful. When we had the community celebration, I honestly did not know, is she going to pull a film together or not? And she did. She was unbelievable. She had the community roaring with laughter. She just moved from the young girls to doing a stuff on a hip-hop DJ on popular Islam. It was a brilliant piece, and the community was as happy as can be. So you see, these are not straightforward things. You are negotiating all the time between the needs of a scholar and your own sense of maybe what you want young women to, the freedom you want them to have, but they're not actually publicly able to do that. So there's a lot of learning that happens. So we show them, and then we get, because we're dealing with young children too, you get the parents to sign off on that point. This woman, I actually don't know if she's still alive. Mother Dot. She was a jazz singer in the clubs in Philadelphia in the 50s. Somebody did a documentary film on her at Temple University. I got hold of it, and she came to our class and talked about what it was like to be in the neighborhoods of Philadelphia, in the African American neighborhoods in the 50s and 60s. Total character, really just wonderful. So she's Mother Dot, she came to Penn. And then this is another moment where the community comes back. So these are the Islamic high school students. They are putting the shortest surah up there in Arabic, and there was a competition amongst our freshmen to see who could learn it quickest. And then they wrote all the names of our students in Arabic. It was a very, very kind of powerful moment of exchange for our students. I can see I've gone on a little bit, that's 30 minutes. I'm going to go quickly now. Okay, so how do we build sustainability? For me, the one thing is the physical presence of the Netta Center. So when I can't be teaching these classes, they are there still doing the work. They're still present in the neighborhood. They have a name and a reputation. So they are still there. That helps me over time. We will often, our grad students will go out and mentor their students, do some additional research. I've had actually a student who's done a PhD on gospel music, actually in Detroit. Aretha Franklin is one of the people she's working with, but it came out of doing the gospel work in West Philadelphia. So that's the further research that goes on. When the Cuba students came onto campus, I had an undergrad TA. I was lucky to have her. She's very enterprising. She took them into the admissions office so that they could learn. We tried to build the pipeline. We haven't yet had somebody from our project who've been admitted into Penn. I would love the day. I will be so happy the day when that happens. But it is to get them to a sense, because what we were told, I was told that one of the students in that Cuba class had come to Penn to use the library. Like I told you publicly, you could. And he was so intimidated by the power of the institution on him, he couldn't walk in the door of the library and use the resource. That's a problem. Okay, so those are the kinds of things we're trying to overcome. So take them into the admissions office, take them into the library, let them get a feel for what the campus is, and that it could have a possibility for them. Penn students, Penn's diversity has changed. The 15 years I've been there, I can't believe how different my classes are now. We now have 100 countries represented in our student population. It wasn't that way 15 years ago. Okay, so there's the thing of Cuba students coming to us, and then when we present on them, we try to bring a community member along with us. It doesn't always work. Okay, so here we've got this issue of creating the archive, and I'm going to tell you a little story here. So my freshman seminar was going to do gospel music stuff. It was a writing seminar, so we had to go into the library and we were required by the writing seminar people that the music librarian would show students what resources there are for writing about gospel music in Philadelphia. That was the class. He pulled up the e-resources and put in the keyword gospel music Philadelphia 0 hits. It was unbelievable. Not 1, not 10, 0. In other words, gospel music, the history is there. It's unbelievable what the history is, and yet nobody has written about it in this way. So there are hymn composers, black hymn composers, who are in the gospel tradition, but they're not seen as from the city of Philadelphia. So it's that sort of coagulation around the city, whereas you get it in Chicago and New York and Kansas City and Los Angeles, you're not getting it in here. So it really gives students a very strong sense of what they are doing in building an archive of research. Reciprocity, of course, is an important part of what we do. You can see some of the things here, creating web pages, copies of films, photos given to community, but that thing also that we don't put it up if you don't want it to be there. And then I told you already about the Annenberg Center, the project that we did collaboratively. Oh, and out of my work also has come an interdisciplinary minor in music. This is also another way of transforming slowly music departments, which tend to be much slower than others to change. We created an interdisciplinary minor in jazz and popular music studies to sort of bring in the students who were kind of on the margins, who are not just European music performers, but who want to do music, but there wasn't really a way for them to show their passion and love except through this interdisciplinary minor. We brought in a community historian. He died actually very recently, Clayton White, who taught at the Community College of Philadelphia to talk to. We had this weekend where we had a mass choir director. We put a whole lot of church choirs together. Clayton White talked about the history of gospel music, and then they rehearsed all weekend and did a performance at the Annenberg Center. And there's another really powerful moment in that, because the guy who was the choir conductor for that mass choir event actually had only one arm, and he just had a little stub. So he conducted, with one arm, and he died a year later, and we had videoed the session, and his family contacted us. This was the only video that they knew was available of their son, brother, whatever. So I had a grad student put a film together for them of that moment. So this is Imagining America, what David Scobie represents. We had people involved in doing site visits from that process. Okay, so I've talked about going beyond 38th Street. This is what Penn students gain. They learn by doing, but perhaps more than that, they learn to engage with people. They learn to engage with difference in a way. They have to get an A, right? And A's matter to those students. They have to figure out a way to solve the problem of the differences that they're feeling. We've had students recognize that people in choirs are sitting with hymn books upside down. Not only are they not reading music, they're not reading English at all. There's no literacy. And these are older members of the community. So the question is, do you expose that, or do you hide it away and retain some sort of privacy in that very public moment when you've zoomed in on somebody with a video camera? And of course, these have become very much models for graduate student professional lives. I have students out there doing all kinds of this sort of work as they are now teaching in universities around the place. And of course, it is this whole, I love risk-taking and problem solving. Okay, so I'm just going to tell you here very quickly, and then I'm sort of done. We'll come to the humanities stuff. These are four or five students that I could just think of very quickly who've really been impacted upon this as work of humanities, right? It's humanities in action. Shantias has done a couple of classes with me. She became a McNair Scholar. McNair Scholars it's federal government funding for first-time university students. She became one, and her trajectory is to do a PhD in gospel music. She came as a freshman, and that's where she's moving. Kelsey, actually, these are people who've just applied. I'm not saying they're going to get it, but they are now wanting to reach out beyond the world. Kelsey's done a couple of my seminars. She's going to go and do work on the punk movement in South Africa, and civic engagement is a key portion of that proposal. Susie is doing stuff on fracking in South Africa, and she's using social media much like she did. She was in my freshman seminar a few years ago. And then, of course, my grad students are doing quite extraordinary stuff in their own teaching. Okay, so the question is, I guess, to come back to the humanities, what is the purpose of the humanities? And here I had to do a little bit of reading. This issue of heritage, is it a usable past to explain the present? Are we trying to create a unified citizenry? Here we have, in thinking of the history of this phenomenon in the US, we have to think about the impact of American studies, which brought in greater multiculturalism, but also of the growing diversity of the population, the impact of globalization. A lot of the things that we've been talking about already, we have to think in humanities of the civil rights and liberal agenda from the 1960s onwards, of humanities for social change. And in many ways, to me, the ABCS pedagogy gives us a way to explore each of those dimensions. I don't think, honestly, do not think that everybody who does this work is motivated by social change. I don't know that I even am motivated by social change. I would like some educational change, institutional transformation, greater representation of gospel music in what we teach our students, and not just one or two bodies of material. Yeah, so I think I'm sort of, it's the issue of expanding the archives of available scholarly knowledge towards greater inclusiveness, greater intercultural understanding, and all the kinds of qualities that really, as contemporary educators, I think we really do need to be addressing. And I think this is the closing point, really, is that Ira Harkavy talks very much about this as pushing towards faculty research, and I have to say that I don't think it happens that easily. I do think that it is the pedagogical transformation that we're looking at first. So you have to say, I need to teach more than what I'm able to do. This is not my training, it's not where I am, but let's see if we can put a partnership together to explore something like the history of gospel music in Philadelphia, or the place of music and Islam in the United States, in the Northeast, whatever it is. You take a project, you form a kind of a set of problems around it, and figure out how to make it work as a pedagogical project that is done in partnership with those who have the knowledge. There's a lot of very interesting work happening with immigrant communities in West Philly. It's a rapidly changing landscape. And I just think it's a very, very powerful way of getting students engaged, but also garnering the knowledge, hearing the voices of people who otherwise we probably would never even talk to, maybe never even engage with, not even step beyond, quote, 38th Street. Okay, thanks so much. Well, this is the part that we didn't talk about, which was the MOOC capacity, but that's something different. That's when we take the local and we want to engage globally. I taught a MOOC, and now Ira Harkavy and I are trying to work out a way to actually see if we can do building community and the shared knowledge as we do in West Philly on a global scale. So it's just taking it to scale.
Questions?
Good afternoon, Professor Muller. Thank you for sharing your class with us. I was just wondering, it appears that Penn really supports service learning and gets behind your work, but most institutions, high-level administrators will say that, yes, we support service learning, but they aren't willing to invest in it. How did you manage to get around that, or how did you manage to get so many people on board with your initiative with the ABCs?
Okay, it's a good question, because I would say even in my own department, I don't think people are hostile to it, but I just kind of went and did it as part of teaching ethnomusicology. So if I could integrate it into what I'm teaching already, so it's a way to, it sort of is requiring less support from people. But what got me initially going is I had no research money, and there was a little course development grant that I got out of the Netta Center. And I have to say the Netta Center has not always been hugely funded either. They've had to be very aggressive in their fundraising. They became the Netta Center when a donor gave. So, but that took a good 10 or 15 years. So these are, not short-term projects. I think you have to start small. You have to work to convince one, when I'm talking now, I've been at Penn 15 years. It wasn't any of this when I got there. So, and it depends also on who your president is, who your provost is. If that changes, the culture changes. Do you know what I mean? So I think then it goes a little bit more underground, perhaps. But I think the point, though, is maybe the Imagining America idea, which is that you need to build with networks of people beyond your institution. It's kind of a social movement, and that's what I love about Imagining America, is that you feel like you're part of something larger. I'm an ethnomusicologist for a long time, was the only one in my department, which meant I did the whole world, one person. Okay, so you feel pretty alone. I know what that feeling is.